we've actually got to shift their food intake to suit when their training is. So they're better off having more food in that half of the day where their training is focused, so that they're getting as many nutrients back in as possible, as close to the training session as possible.
You're tuning into the High Performance Path podcast, and I'm your host, Alex. If you want to increase your productivity, enhance your mental performance, hack your sleep, and build a bulletproof body, then you're in the right place. Get ready as we dive into interviews with performance coaches, business owners, and health professionals to find out their daily routines, habits, and movement practices. All right, let's go. All right, welcome back to the High Performance Path podcast, and welcome to the show, Beck. How are you going?
Yeah, morning. Good. Thanks for having me.
No worries. So, why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself, what you do?
Yep.
And I know you work with the Hunter Academy of Sport.
Mm-hmm.
Tell the listeners how you kind of got into that.
Yeah, sure. So I'm an accredited practicing dietitian and also an accredited sports dietitian. So I do work in my private practice, Nutrient Nation, which we're based within the Hunter Academy of Sport.
Okay.
Something a lot of people probably don't know about me is that I also work at the university in a research position as well.
Okay. Oh, interesting.
So I'm a researcher and I try to incorporate that into the private practice where possible. So when I came through uni and finished uni, I did my PhD in Human Physiology, and in the final year of that, I set up my private practice in the hope that I would have some work coming out of that. And then I was lucky enough to get a full-time position at uni at the same time. So since 2016, I've sort of been juggling the both of those. When I first started in my practice, though, I started off within a gym in town in Newcastle West. Was there for a few years, and then the lease ran out there, so we were looking to move, and the gym was looking to move to McDonald Jones Stadium, which is where I am now. And we were looking for an office space for me to move with them, but unfortunately there wasn't an office space in the area where they were going. So I sort of reached out to the rest of the building so that I could still be in the same vicinity. And I was lucky enough that the Hunter Academy of Sport had an office space that I could actually rent. And it turned out that only a couple of weeks beforehand, their sports dietitian had moved on.
Oh.
So it was a bit of a lucky turn of fate, I think, because sports nutrition has always been the biggest passion for me in dietetics. So that was back in the end of 2018. So that's when I first moved into the Hunter Academy of Sport and became their consulting sports dietitian as well. So it was a pretty cool way that it came about.
Yeah, awesome.
Ending up there.
Just fell into place.
Yeah. So it was good.
How did you find your kind of passion? How did you when did you realize that you had such a passion for sports dietitian, or dietitian and then sports dietitian?
Yeah. Look, going through high school, I always loved nutrition. I was always looking into different foods, what nutrients they had. I would train a couple of times a day at the gym. I'd go to work as well. After high school, I worked in hospitality. You'd work sort of long hours. Of a night time, I'd still go to the gym, and I really noticed the impact that poor nutrition could have on my performance, but also just not nailing it. Like, you can have a healthy diet, but particularly when you're looking at sports performance, if you don't nail it, it can really have a big impact, not only on your performance, but your energy levels throughout the day, how well you can concentrate throughout the day. And I think for me, it was more of a personal experience that I really noticed those things. But I wasn't ready to go to university then. I just wanted to work. I wanted to travel. I wanted to have a bit of fun. So I didn't go.
Live life a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And get sort of some of those other skills that life skills that you don't learn going straight from high school into university. So I didn't go back to uni until I was 27 or 28.
Oh, wow.
So applied for nutrition and dietetics and got into that. And always knew I wanted to do sports, but you definitely get told that it's hard to get into that
You've
area.
got to work your way up to
Yeah.
focusing on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And the job opportunities in that space are pretty tricky to get into. So I just thought, well, I'm going to create my own. So working in the gym initially with my private practice was that starting point. And it was a gym that had a really big focus on endurance athletes. So they trained endurance athletes. So then I got to really get into that nutrition space with them as well. Yeah.
Do you regret not starting your uni degree earlier, or are you glad you started when you did?
I would recommend anybody wait to go to university. Absolutely. Even like from my experience, I know that those life skills and having other jobs and traveling helped me in my degree. And I supervise students that come through and teach students at the uni when they come through. And I can tell the difference between those that have come straight from high school and those that have had some other experience beforehand. And you start off at a higher level when you've had some other life experience before that.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I agree with that as well.
Yeah.
Can you explain to the listeners what exactly the difference is between a dietitian and a nutritionist?
Yes.
Because I think there's a lot of confusion around that.
Yeah, absolutely. So a dietitian, you have to have the undergraduate university degree to be qualified as a dietitian. So both nutritionists and dietitians, so we're nutritionists as well, we just have the added qualification on top of that. And nutritionists can work with just general kind of healthy eating cases. These are healthy foods for you, but they can't work with clients that have particular health conditions. They shouldn't be giving medical nutrition therapy advice, that's what our extra qualification gives us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. So I wanted to talk a little bit about omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids.
Yep.
Can you explain what they are to the listeners and why they're important?
Yeah, sure. So omega-3s and 6s are polyunsaturated fats. So I'm sure a lot of people have probably heard of the three categories of fatty acids. So we've got our saturated, our monounsaturated, and polyunsaturated fats. Without getting too technical, if you think about a really long chain of links that are bound together, polyunsaturated fats have a couple of their links that are bound by double bonds, whereas monounsaturated fats, their links that are bound together have one double bond and the rest of the links are just bound by a single bond. And then saturated fats, no double bonds at all. So their links are all just bound together by single, binding. So that's sort of the main chemical difference between the different fatty acids, and then there's different health benefits of them. So if we look at where omega-3s and 6s come from, so the body can actually produce omega-3s and 6s in the body to a small amount, but not to the amount that the body probably actually requires and to get those health benefits. So we really want to be getting them from food sources as the number one starting point. So our omega-3s come from our fatty fish, so our salmon, our herring, our mackerel, and then chia seeds and walnuts. And then our omega-6s are more plant-based. So from some of our plant-based oils, so sunflower and safflower oil, also walnuts as well, and pumpkin seeds as well. So the health benefits that are proposed for omega-3s and 6s are, like the big one that's been around for quite some time is definitely heart health, particularly with omega-3s, and then those health conditions that are associated with pain and inflammation, so typically something along the lines of arthritis. More recently, the mental health benefits are becoming a bit better, well known. So improving memory and cognition and depression and anxiety. So the evidence is pretty good for omega-3s and 6s in those three spaces. But there's always a bit of sort of cloudiness there. Not everyone sees the benefits, and I think that's the hard part when it comes to research, that you're always going to have people that respond and people that don't respond, and it probably comes back to what's their starting diet to begin with, is it already adequate, and what's their underlying health status. So if you're already in a good place, often increasing amounts of something, whether that's by food or supplements, may not give too much added benefit.
Yeah.
But if you're lacking to begin with, then supplementing or adding extra sources of these nutrients in can actually help.
Mm. Yeah, cool. So there would be a standard like an amount that you should have in your diet.
Yep.
Is that I've heard that that's quite a lot of people don't reach that standard
Yep.
in the typical Western diet.
Yep.
Is that true? And how far off are most people from hitting the recommended intake?
Yeah. So I guess we want to be looking at 2 to 3 serves of fish, and even more so the fatty fish per week. And then having nuts and seeds in your diet every day of the week is probably going to help you get there. And most people would not be doing that, particularly not from food. But then if they are taking an omega-3 supplement on top of that, then they're probably hitting their omega-3s, but not necessarily the omega-6s. And I think it's probably the omega-3s that people lack the most, because we don't typically eat a lot of fish, and particularly fatty fish. And there was some concern a few years ago that ratio of omega-3s to 6s was a bit out, and that there was more omega-6s than omega-3s, and that can have detrimental effects. So now we know that because omega-6s also have benefits, we don't want to be cutting out omega-6s. We want to be increasing omega-3s to make that ratio more optimal. Which is by increasing the fatty fish or omega-3 supplementation. And for a lot of people, the practical side of it is going for a supplement form, because it's not always easy to fit those serves in.
That's what I wanted to dive into next, supplementing with fish oil.
Yes.
Because I know a lot of people do it, but they don't even know why.
Yes.
They just think they should do it, so they do it. And it's relatively cheap.
Yeah.
So they might as well. But like you said, it's hard to know. It's if you already have enough, or your ratio is fine, it's hard to see any benefit of taking it if you don't need it.
Yeah.
So is there a downside to taking too much fish oil?
Look, I think that there's a downside to taking too much of anything, to be honest, because it's the body knows what balance it needs, and anything in excess is never really going to be that good. You're going to get some kind of side effects. People that take fish oil know that you might get a bit of reflux, and that fishy taste is certainly not ideal. So if you start increasing that, you're going to get more of those side effects. There's nothing out there to look, and no research certainly doesn't mean there is no adverse effects. It just means that there's no research to support that. So at the moment, there's no strong research to suggest that excess consumption of supplements, of omega-3 supplements, of fish oils, is going to propose any adverse effects. But you would imagine that it potentially could, because when you change one thing, there's always a reaction. And then you're also altering, so the effects that the omega-3s have on the production of other fatty acids in the body is then going to be out of balance as well. So it's not just the omega-3s, it's the impact it then has on everything else in the body. So it's always good to go by the recommendations, because when we don't know the implications long term of excess intake, then that's when we can get into trouble.
Okay. So going back to the weekly recommended amounts you should be eating of omega-3 fatty acids.
Yes.
What was that again? And when would you kind of recommend someone taking a fish oil supplement?
Yes. So the recommendations from the Heart Foundation are around 250 to 300 milligrams per day. So that can come from your fatty fish, or it can come from the nuts and the seeds that we spoke about before. So look, it's a lot easier if you aim to get a good source of omega-3s in every day of the week, rather than trying to play catch up on 1 or 2 days of the week, because then you've got to have, a lot of them. Fish oil capsules are fine to take every day. And for the benefits, you would. The supplement form, look, different ones have different amounts, but they're more like 1 to 3 grams. And that's of omega-3s are the EPA and DHA. So that's the combined amount of the EPA and DHA, which is
What do they mean?
So they're the long chain
Oh, yeah.
omega-3s, and they're the ones that have the benefits.
Yeah.
So if you find a supplement that doesn't have those in them, it's not going to be as beneficial. So I know that there's some plant-based or some vegan omega-3 supplements that are out there, but they don't, because they're not sourced from a marine source.
Yeah, okay.
They don't have EPA and DHA, so they don't have the same benefits as a marine-based omega-3 supplement.
Okay.
So I know that vegan omega-3s are quite big at the moment. And people just don't realise that they don't have that active ingredient that we really need in there. The body can convert the plant-based omega-3s into sort of the beneficial omega-3s that we need, but not to the amount that we need it to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So what do you recommend? What do you recommend to the listeners that are maybe vegan?
Yep.
What kind of foods do you recommend them eat to make sure they get enough of their omega-3s? If the fish oil supplements, because they come from animals, so they can't have them. And if the vegan fish oil supplements aren't to the kind of good standard, what do you recommend for them to eat? Just more of the vegan fat?
Yeah, which is hard, which is typically like your walnuts and your chia seeds are more the nuts and seeds that have omega-3s. So they're going to need to be increased. So you might have a few walnuts in the day. You might make oats or a smoothie that has the chia seeds in there, and you might consider having potentially the supplement at the same time, so that you're getting an increased amount of the non-marine sourced omega-3s to give your body the best chance to build as much as it possibly can.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Is there a variance between the quality of supplements, or a lot of them fine to take? Like, is there what should you kind of watch out for?
Yeah, look, these days they're probably, because omega-3, the benefits of omega-3s has been known for quite some time now. The quality of those supplements is definitely, improved, but it is definitely, if we're looking at, again, the marine ones, looking for the dose on there to maybe be that 2 to 3 grams of the combined EPA and DHA. And it's similar with lots of other supplements as well. Protein supplements is a good example where people know that they've got to have leucine, which is a branched chain amino acid, but they don't know how much they should be having. And a lot of protein supplements that you see, the ideal amount is like 2,000 milligrams or 2 grams. And some supplements only have 500 milligrams in there. So I guess it's also knowing that ideal amount that's going to get you that benefit that you're after. So for fish oil, it's that sort of 2 to 3 grams.
Cool. Let's talk about branched chain amino acids a bit.
Yes. Yeah.
Can you explain what they are to the listeners?
Yeah. Yep. So amino acids are the building blocks in the body, and then we can categorize amino acids into essential and non-essential, and then we have our branch chain amino acids, which are our longer chain sort of branch chain, and I guess it's all to do with the structure of the amino acid.
Can you talk about essential and non-essential, and why they're essential and why they're not essential?
Yeah, definitely. So I guess the difference between essential and non-essential is whether the body produces them itself, so therefore doesn't need to get them from food, whereas essential amino acids we need to get from food because our body doesn't produce them itself. So we want to get the combination, I guess the combination of the of the essential and non-essential amino acids gives us a complete protein. So that's why we sort of want the combination of the two. It's the branched chain amino acids that are thought to play the biggest role in muscle synthesis. So they're the ones that we typically focus on when we're looking at manipulating body composition, gaining muscle mass, and they seem to be the key that unlocks that muscle synthesis. So without the BCAAs, that's unlikely to happen. But you can, we typically get enough of them from food that we don't really need to go down the supplement pathway.
I was going to ask you that.
Yeah.
Because I've kind of had second thoughts on that as a
Yep.
supplement.
Yep.
Can you explain what foods you can have BCAAs in, that you
Yes.
can find them in? And so you do, actually, we'll start with that. What
Yep.
foods
Yep.
do you can you eat to
Yeah.
get your essential branched chain amino
Yeah.
acids?
Yeah. So again, we're looking at our animal-based proteins.
Yeah.
So if you think of all of the foods that are in that category, so your, any of your meats, your meat proteins, so your red meats, your poultry, your fish, and then your dairy products as well. So particularly with protein supplements, if we're looking at a whey protein, which is a certain part of the milk that's been extracted, has a much higher content of the branched chain amino acids.
Yeah.
Because it's an animal-based protein. So that's, and we don't fall short most of the time unless we're vegetarian or vegan. We don't fall short typically getting animal-based proteins into our diet.
Yeah. Now, what about vegans?
Mm-hmm.
Would you say it's beneficial for vegans to supplement with a BCAA supplement? Are BCAA supplements vegan? If they
No,
come,
there are some. So, particularly if we look at, there are vegan so if you combine a couple of different plant-based proteins, so if we combine, say, rice and pea protein,
Yeah.
you're going to still get that combination, and you're probably going to get all of the essential and non-essential amino acids. So
Okay.
there are branched chain amino acids in non-animal based products, but
Yeah.
they're not in one particular food.
Yeah.
You've got to combine lots of different things to get there. So there are, if I was recommending a supplement, I'd recommend more of a protein powder that had the combination of the plant-based proteins to get those amino acids in there. Because then you're getting the added benefit of the extra protein as well, as
Yeah.
opposed to just getting the BCAAs from a single product.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. So I think a lot of people are starting to supplement with vegan
Yeah.
protein,
Yep.
even if they're not vegan.
Mm-hmm.
I use a vegan protein powder.
Yep.
I'm not vegan myself.
Yep.
I'm not against vegan. I just don't. The vegan diet, for me, I'm not ready to try that yet.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
For me, because my diet, I seem to be going fine with how I am.
Yep.
I will try it one day,
Mm-hmm.
but I haven't tried it yet.
Yep.
Now I have wanted to cut down a lot of my dairy intake,
Yep.
and so that's one of the swaps I've made.
Yep.
I've gone to a vegan protein powder, and that's a combination of rice and pea protein.
Mm-hmm.
Now I think you can get hemp protein as well.
Yes.
With vegan protein powders,
Yep.
is there anything you should watch out for or that you recommend? I know you just mentioned maybe a combination
Yeah.
of rice and pea. What about hemp protein?
So hemp protein as well. So it's actually, I'm sure the hemp protein, does it have some of the omega-3s in there as well? From memory, but look, I can check up on that and get back to you about that. But it's more so just making sure that your vegan protein gets all of the essential and non-essential amino acids. So you definitely want to try and get a protein powder that has the mix. I know there's certainly some vegan proteins out there that don't. They just have a single plant-based protein in there, and it's just not going to quite hit the mark. And because it is more tricky for vegans to hit their nutrient targets, if you can find a product that does include more of what you need, that it's not as hard to then get it from the rest of your diet, then that's probably the way to go. Yeah.
How do we find out how much protein we actually need?
Yep.
Because I think a lot of people don't know where to start with calculating how much they need.
Yeah. So we have general recommendations which start at 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. And look, that's for the general population. So that's sort of the minimum amount of protein required for good health.
For like non-athletes.
Yes.
Because it would be different, wouldn't it? For
Yeah.
athletes and for general population.
Yes, yeah, definitely. So then it goes anywhere from sort of 0.8 grams per kilo up to sort of 2 to 3 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. And where you fit on that spectrum is going to be dependent on, of course, your body weight, because it's a per kilo calculation, your training load, so how many days per week you train, the duration of your training sessions, and then, of course, probably the biggest factor is the type of training that you actually do. So if you do more resistance-based training, then you're going to be at the higher end of the spectrum. Whereas if you're more of an endurance athlete, depending on how long your training sessions are, you might be more middle of the batch for aiming for protein. So it's not too difficult to work out once you sort of know what those numbers are. And if you've got a way of measuring whether you're maintaining muscle mass throughout sort of, week to week through your training program, if you're maintaining muscle mass, you're probably getting a decent amount of protein. If you notice that you're struggling to maintain muscle mass, protein is an obvious starting point to potentially increase and make sure we're getting enough. But I think protein's definitely the space that's changed a lot over the last few years. We used to just calculate a total amount for the day and say, okay, well, as long as you hit that, then that's fine. But we look at it very differently now. It's more about the spread of protein across the day. So if I calculated that you should have 120 grams of protein in total in the day, I'd probably look at splitting that into 4 meals across the day. So then looking at more 4 lots of 30 grams of protein across the day. And I know then that 30 gram amount within a particular meal is also sort of that ideal amount for muscle synthesis as well.
Yeah, there's a couple things I want to ask you based off what we've just said. Timing of nutrients,
Yes.
I want to dive into. But before, I've recently kind of heard from a few different sources that too much protein, there's nearly no side effects.
Yep.
So you're better off to be over your protein target than under your protein target.
Yep.
What are your thoughts on that? Do
Yep.
you also agree with that?
Yeah, the research space has definitely changed in the high protein diet space. So we once thought that there was a negative effect of having too much protein, but research is showing now that that's likely not the case unless you're in a population that has an underlying kidney disease, because the kidneys have to process the additional protein, which places an extra load on them. So if we're a general healthy population, there's probably not too much of an issue with having a higher protein intake. My main concern, and I'm fine with slightly overshooting the protein just to make sure, but I don't like people doing it in excess, because again, it comes back to, well, if I'm having far more protein than I need, what else am I missing out on? And that's the biggest thing for me, because protein is not the only nutrient that we need to be concerned about. So if we're too high in one, it typically means that we're not high enough in others.
Yeah, cool. So I think my thoughts on that are, if your goal is to gain weight or gain muscle,
Yep.
then there's nearly no side effects to
Yep.
having too much protein. But if your goal is to lose weight
Mhm.
and you want to be in a calorie deficit,
Yep.
having too much protein, you may overshoot your calories
Yep.
just because you've got too much protein. And also, if you're hitting your protein target,
Yep.
plus more, those calories could be put towards like more foods that are higher in micronutrients,
Yep.
things like that, vegetables, green, or like you said, you might be off your carbs, or your fats might be too low.
Yeah.
So that, as far as I'm concerned, there's nearly no side effects other than that. You could be putting those calories
Yes.
to other things.
Yeah. And on a calorie, I guess, just to point out, on a calorie restricted diet, we would typically increase protein a bit more, because when you're in deficit, you're more likely to lose muscle mass, which is not going to be beneficial for weight loss goals. So we would certainly increase protein to an extent. And yeah, as I said, look, there's no research out there now to say that we can't have more protein than what the general recommendations typically are, and that can be beneficial so long as we're looking at the other nutrients in our diet and making sure we're hitting those. And for muscle gain or weight gain, the main key to that is an energy surplus, not protein.
Yeah.
So, it doesn't, as long as we're getting adequate protein, if the rest of it comes from carbs or fat, doesn't play an overly huge role so long as we're in a surplus. If we're in a calorie deficit and a super high protein intake, we're not going to gain weight and muscle mass. We've got to have that kilojoule surplus to reach that goal.
Yeah, sweet. Let's talk about nutrient timing a little bit.
Yeah.
So how important is timing around, like, this is for like kind of athletes?
Yes.
How important is timing throughout your day?
Yeah.
And when should you what food should you have around training, I guess?
Yep. Look, I think it definitely plays a really important part in performance and recovery. How big a part it plays probably depends on the level of athlete that you are. It definitely becomes more and more important the higher level athlete that you are, but there's always going to be benefits in getting that timing right. So if we're looking at pre-training, a lot of people skip breakfast or whatever meal it is prior to their training, and they're not getting any kind of carbohydrate or fluid intake prior to their session. And that can have a really big impact on performance. And particularly for athletes, performance is their priority. So if they're not getting carbohydrates beforehand, then that's impacting performance. Looking at the recovery sort of window afterwards, that sort of 30 to 60 minute recovery window, it's ideal to start then getting our protein, our carbs, electrolytes, fluid back in that window. But for most of us, if we're just general gym goers, we've probably got a bit more room to play there with how soon we need to have it. But for elite athletes, when they're looking for every small benefit that they can get, then the sooner they time that recovery meal into following their session, the more benefits they're going to have. And then probably, again, coming back to the protein across the day, it's probably the biggest nutrient timing one that we want to get right. So the muscle will sort of continue to build and repair across the day. But if we don't keep feeding it protein across the day, the ability to keep synthesizing that muscle will decrease every few hours, which is when we then really want to top the protein back up again, particularly if we're doing a lot of training, because that's what's going to maximize the muscle synthesis across the day. So, there's certainly benefits, more so timing around specific training sessions of the day where their training is focused, so that they're getting as many nutrients back in as possible, as close to the training session as possible.
So what do you recommend for people who train quite early? And
Yes.
like, this is pretty common, like you said before, a lot of people skip breakfast and don't eat before training.
Mm-hmm.
What do you recommend they do
Yeah.
for like a carbohydrate source or
Yeah.
fluid before training?
Yeah, so it's definitely very individual, because we know sometimes it's not really an intentional thing that they don't have something beforehand. It's that they just can't really stomach anything beforehand.
Yes.
And I think that plays a big role. And we always go with more fluid-based options. So for people that can't really stomach anything beforehand, go for a fluid-based option. So whether that's just a glass of juice, something as simple as that you can get down. Some people can stomach a small glass of Milo, milk with a scoop of Milo. Some people can't tolerate milk on their tummy beforehand, but we know that a fluid-based option sits on the stomach a lot better. If you have any products at home which are a sort of a carbohydrate powder, even just adding a scoop of that into a glass of water, just to give you a little bit more carbohydrate to play with during your training session. Simple things like just a piece of toast with jam or honey, a banana, it doesn't have to be anything out of the ordinary. But if you're really one of those people that just doesn't have the time and cannot stomach anything, your meal the night before becomes far more important.
Okay.
So you need to make sure that that's a higher carbohydrate option, so that you've still got enough stores come a morning training session.
Okay, cool. For people that might be in that situation,
Yep.
um, how does your last meal impact your sleep? Like
Yeah.
if you eat a big meal too close to sleeping,
Yep.
I don't know if you know much about this, but
Yep.
does that affect your sleep at all?
It certainly does for some people. And look, it's probably not it's not ideal to be eating a super large meal, within an hour, hour and a half of going to bed. So there's definitely some people that feel that they wake more during the night, or it takes them longer to get to sleep because the stomach is still digesting that. And when we're lying down, it's doing that at a much slower rate than if we were sort of, having a slow walk around the house.
Yeah.
But I still know plenty of people that can have a massive meal and they'll fall straight asleep and stay asleep. Fluid is probably the bigger one before. I know some people that train in the afternoon and even later evening, and then they've got to replace fluid afterwards, and then they're up all night running to the bathroom.
Breaks.
Yeah, so it's a really tricky one. I guess it's probably more you really want to make sure you're starting those sessions well hydrated, staying hydrated during the session so that for the few hours afterwards, it's more just sipping. You're not trying to scull kind of litres of water before bed.
I've been supplementing with hydrolyte before training.
Yep.
Because that's made for it's made for like people who are like dehydrated or are sick and have been vomiting or things like that.
Yep.
But if you just have one, even though you're feeling fine, it can just rehydrate you with electrolytes and stuff. And I've been having one of those in the morning, which I think is half a serving.
Yep.
So I think a serving is 2 of the tablets. So I'll just have one in the morning and then one in the afternoon before training.
Yep.
Just to kind of space it out. But I think that works really well. When I get home from work, because I train in the afternoon, just because of my work time and my daily schedule, I have to train in the afternoon. So I get home, I have a hydrolyte and I have a carb drink.
Yes.
And then since doing that, my performance, like my workouts, I feel so much better. Like I don't hit a wall.
Yes.
Which I have experienced in the past, which I think has, that's been a game changer for me.
I think it's an interesting point because for a long time we've been told to watch sodium intake, haven't we? It raises blood pressure. But we're talking again about the general population. We do sweat testing at Nutrient Nation where we measure people's fluid and electrolyte losses in their sweat. And the amount of sodium that an athlete can lose in 1 hour can exceed the daily recommendation that we would typically give just the average person.
Wow.
So if we're not replacing electrolytes, and particularly sodium and fluid, of course, then it can have a massive impact on our energy levels and how well we perform in our sport. So it's a really big one. So having some either beforehand, which helps to retain a bit more fluid as well, or sipping it sort of throughout training sessions can definitely help people.
I didn't know that was a thing, sweat testing.
Yeah, yes.
How does that process work? Do you do it during an athlete's workout or afterwards, or?
Yeah, during. So we get them in. We try to, usually it's an additional session. So with some people with Hunter Academy, we do it sort of within their set training sessions, but individual clients that we get coming in, and typically endurance athletes, we set a session outside of their normal training, unless we can tee it up, that they're local and we can go and meet them at the park or something like that.
So you can do it portably.
Yes.
You can just do it where, like at a park or a running track or something.
And ideally it's often better because particularly where we're situated as well, if we get people to come to us at Broadmeadow, it's flat. There's no hills or anything there, so it's not going to simulate what a normal training session or race would be. So we have clients that do endurance and ultra endurance trail runs, and they have different sort of training routes around Newcastle that have a lot of hills in them. So we actually go out and meet them at those places so that we can do it in a simulated environment.
What an awesome day of work.
Yeah, I know,
Going
can't
to,
complain.
like Glenrock, there's some really nice trails in
Yes,
Glenrock.
yeah, it's one of the bigger ones. Mental blank with what the other one is called. It'll come to me in a minute. But there's like 2 kilometres of like, almost straight incline at the start of this other one that I'm thinking of. So it's pretty intense, but that's the stuff that we love about sports nutrition. But so essentially we weigh them before and after a session. We put patches on different sites of their body to collect the sweat, and that is the electrolyte losses in those patches, and then the patches get sent away to the lab, and then the lab send us the results, and then with the weight loss that we can see, which is equivalent to the fluid loss over that period of time, we can give them a per hour or a per litre loss of sodium.
Okay.
Yeah, which is pretty cool. So it really allows for more personalised nutrition strategies.
Okay. So is that, what are you collecting in the sweat test? Is it just simply for that
Yes.
to measure the sodium loss?
Yes. Yeah.
For nutrition strategies
Yeah.
during racing?
Yeah.
Is there a big variance of people?
Huge.
Because I know working in a CrossFit gym, some people just drip with sweat and some people don't.
Yeah.
So those people will lose a lot more sodium, right?
Yeah. So females typically lose less fluid and sodium than males. We've had sort of females lose as little as 200 to 300 mils of fluid in an hour. We've had males lose up as high as 3.6 litres in an hour, which is huge. Sodium-wise can range, the low hundreds, 300 or 400 milligrams per hour, maybe up to 1,500 milligrams per hour, which the 1,500 is sort of around that suggested dietary target of sodium intake. And so it varies so much from person to person. I think that's what makes it so cool, because we can say to someone, well, look, you're kind of just, taking a stab in the dark, whereas we can really give you your numbers.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
That would benefit a lot of people, especially people who are serious about, their racing and actually plan, their race day nutrition or whatever, especially on the long endurance stuff, like you mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely. Because a lot of people don't plan ahead. Yeah. So having a nice strategy in place certainly helps them throughout those races.
So what are some good resources that you would recommend on like nutrition?
Yes.
So like either authors that you like or podcasts or websites?
Yep. So Sports Dietitians Australia is probably my go-to, and particularly for recommending to clients, because they have a lot of free resources. So they have the blogs and fact sheets, which they have fact sheets for nearly every sport that you can think of, for adults, for adolescents, for intolerances, all of that sort of thing.
What do they show, fact sheets?
So they just get a sports dietitian that's an expert in that area to write the fact sheet on what is the
so
the type of
different subjects and topics.
Yeah, and what nutrition you should be focusing on depending on what sport you play. Whether you're an adult or an adolescent, some of the barriers that you can come across and that sort of thing. They have recipes and things on there as well. If you're a bit more sciencey, the International Journal of Sports Nutrition and Exercise Metabolism is amazing. It's pretty much the go-to for any sports dietitian in research when they want to publish a paper.
Okay.
If you I don't know if many people are on Twitter. I definitely see more sports kind of stuff on Twitter than I do evidence-based sports stuff on Twitter.
Then Instagram, say.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. Look, there's some amazing sports dietitians out there, but there's not a huge amount of them that are active on social media. Yeah. I know there's a lot of people have probably seen Alicia Edge, so she's with Compete Nutrition, so she's local as
Yep.
well.
Oh, yeah.
She's definitely a go-to for people, and she does weekly lives, and she has some really good resources and things as well. So she is definitely a local sports dietitian to go to
Cool.
as well for some really cool information.
Yep.
The Australian Institute of Sport, NSWIS as well, so New South Wales Institute of Sport, their websites as well have really good information on there. And there's a book which is actually by the president of Sports Dietitians Australia, and it's called Eat Like an Athlete. And that came out last year, I think it was. So if people are after, a book to read as well, which really takes, as complex as sports nutrition can be, but really puts it into a format that's easily digestible. That's a really cool resource as well.
Cool.
Yeah.
Is there any other books that you would recommend, or that's not to do with nutrition at all?
What books have I got? I'm terrible with remembering names of books. I read probably more business books and things like that, but I never remember what they're called off the top of my head. But happy to send a couple to you if you want to include it.
Yeah, I'll put all these in the show notes as well, the links to whatever books or websites.
Yes.
That were mentioned.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
All right, well, we've got to wrap things up.
Sure.
So where do you want to send people to any of your stuff, or where can people get in contact with you if they want to find out more?
Yeah, so we've got our website, so it's just www.nutrientnation.com.au. Our email is info@nutrientnation.com.au, and we're on Instagram, which is just @nutrientnation. So we love getting messages and emails off people, even asking questions and things. We're always, looking to get more engaged with people that are out there as well, and seeing how else we can help people improve their nutrition for their performance, because we certainly know the value that it has. Yeah.
Awesome. All right, well, thank you very much. It's been awesome having you on the show.
Thanks for having me.
All right, guys, if you enjoyed this, please take a screenshot and share it. I'd love to see who's listening. And also, please subscribe and give a rating on iTunes. Sending positive vibes to everyone out there. Thanks heaps for listening.